Hi, good morning, and welcome to the room 4 on the session of Meet the Innovators and in the Data and Computer Science, Health Technology, and Engineering track. My name is Mauricio Cerda. I work as an assistant professor at Universidad de Chile in Santiago, Chile. Yeah, I'm very happy to be working in this session as a moderator. And I would like to first to all the attendees, if they can turn on the cameras. And because we are not so many, if they can shortly introduce themselves, starting by is Vincent is here or Anand Matrik?
I am here.
Anand, can you introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Anand Mhatre. I'm an assistant professor at the Ohio State University, and it's a pleasure to join this session.
Right. And Vincent is here? Not yet? Not yet. Okay, so the idea of this session is that we have a few slides, each one of the projects that are in the track. And the idea is that we will share some of our initial ideas, how we develop the project, our current results, and then we will open up for discussion for each one of the projects, and finally more discussion about the lessons we have learned and maybe future direction for our projects. So can you move to the next slide? So I will talk a little bit of the project we are working on in my team. So the project is about early risk detection of mental deterioration by a smartphone-based auditory screening, and that's the team. Myself, Paul, physician, Victor Castañeda, electrical engineer, Cristian Muñoz, electrical engineer, Manuel, physician, Cristina de Gatica, who is a technician, clinical technician, and Francisca, who is an account manager. So you see already it's a broad team with many different expertise. And we were awarded the Catalyst Award in 2021 in ANIT, that's the National Agency of Research in Chile. Okay, so can you move to the next slides, please? So first of all, my background is as a computer engineer. So I was very surprised when Paul, one of the physicians of the team, who is an expert in the auditory systems, explained me all this word about hearing loss and the connection of the hearing loss with dementia in particular. So, and we start to discuss around this idea, and we start to wonder and make the connections. How can we use this with knowledge about hearing with the idea of keeping population in good physical and mental health? And one of the key things in this idea of mental health and being in good health, in particular mental health, is to start by an early diagnosis, to realize when your mental health start to decay. And this is already very clear from the World Health Organization. And one of the things that surprised me when I start to learn about this topic is that if you take all the risk, dementia risk, and you start to count in the early life, midlife, later life, the single modifiable higher risk is hearing loss. So you have education that is hard to modify because it's what you learn when you study when you are a kid, for instance, but it's something difficult to modify. You have hearing loss, and you have, of course, other aspects like smoking and depression, but hearing loss is not very so well known that is so accounts for a large percentage. So let's start to say, hey, we need to do something about this, and what's the motivation for this project? Can you move to the next slide? So how hearing loss is assessed currently? So you typically go to a silent room, that the one in the picture left, and a specialist will put you some kind of headphones and do some sounds and ask you, can you hear this sound or not? And they will repeat the process from different amplitude and different frequencies. And this is something that requires a specialist and a special setup. But there is a specific characteristic of the hearing system that it's not a passive system; it's an active system, and it's something called autoacoustic emissions. That is a sound that the ears produce when you stimulate in a very specific frequency with a very specific amplitude. And this is not so extreme. You probably have seen it before with babies. With babies, typically the way you check if they can hear is with these autoacoustic emissions. And very interesting, this autoacoustic emission has been associated with cognitive decline risk. So you have a way to measure how the health of the hearing without the need of a specialist, or that's what we believe at least. Can you move to the next slide, please? So our project is about how to design and build a unique headphone that integrates two speakers with one microphone. You need to, it's a very weird speaker. We have two speakers in the same headphone and one microphone at low cost with a special denoising and detection algorithm into a smartphone. Our global aim with this project and other projects is to provide a simplified risk assessment of mental deterioration. We not only need auditory information, we need something to define mental risk, and we use MRI as a standard for that, and combined with machine learning algorithms. Can you move to the next one, please? So our results have been very intense. 1 year project is a very short time frame to this kind of development. So you can see here in the left, by the way, the guy in the picture is Manuel, and the technician who is putting the headphone is Cristina. And we are in one of the clinical hospital of our university silent rooms. So it's a special isolated room. And you see in the upper part of the left image, the headphone that is like version, I don't know, 20 of the headphone with this way to fix it. And to the right, you see a plot where you have the frequency. So this frequency of the sound from 500 hertz to 10 kilohertz. And you have our equipment in blue, and the red line is a reference equipment, it's a commercial equipment, and we are comparing both signals. So typically, to be able to speak and communicate, you need a good range of detection between 500 to 4 kilohertz. So in that range of frequency, we are at about 80% of agreement between our equipment and the high-end equipment in critical frequencies. So it has been very, very tough to develop because of the time frame. Can you move to the next one, please? And I want to just highlight some of the things we learned. Probably we will see some repeated in other presentation, but for me, it was at some points, I mean, I cannot know all of the aspects of this project because it involves many things from the medical side, from the electronic side. I'm mostly working data analysis. So to have this team I just mentioned, to have Victor, Christian, who works in electronics, the physician, etc., is really key. You need the team to do this. Otherwise, you will not able to do it. In our project, we're mainly focused to develop hardware. Hardware is super tough to develop in a short time frame. And I cannot, well, I guess you have the same problems. We all have the same problems, but with the COVID, to import and get parts, it was super difficult. So we were able to do it anyway. But something we realized with the time is that we have these prototypes that works nicely in the lab. But when we start to use with several subjects, we are about 20, 30 subjects now. Ergonomy is really critical. So, I mean, the way you put it in the patient, the way the hardware and the software combines to make it easy to use, is really critical, because sometimes the equipment is working perfectly, but if it's not set up properly in the hearing, it will not really work. Another thing is that we have a lot of issues along the way, but my lessons here will be in this kind of device: test as early as possible, and probably you hear in the main session, do the experiment as fast as possible. I can translate that sentence so that sentence that way too. What about the current work and future plans? We are currently in conversation with an industrial partner in Chile, because we need to transform this from this concept, from this prototype into a product. And this, we think it requires help and to look for other connections and apply for another research and development grant in Chile, most likely, to continue the project and evolve into a product. That's it from my side. I don't know if someone has some question or remark before jumping to the next presentation. Yeah, please, Mosem, sorry.
Hello, thank you, Marcelo, for your for your presentation. It's very interesting. My background is human movement science, and I am familiar to some extent with the sensory modalities. One question I have is about the end user perspective about the data, because if you show me this graph, and so I just want to know, do you have your end user or patient or clinician's perspective about what does mean this data to them in terms of diagnosis, the early decline in the cognitive function by your system?
Yeah, thank you, Moses, for your question. Yeah, so there is one part that is missing from the hearing curves. You see, you need the predictor that actually says low risk, medium risk, high risk. This is something that relates to another study we have it. And finally, our goal is to provide this in that way. So low, medium, and high risk. But to be able to do that, because we have the data and we have the hearing measurements done with commercial equipment, we need to be sure that our low cost equipment works, and it works in a way we can repeat. So yes, we are missing this part of the software and how the software will assess the cognitive decline risk. You're right. I don't know, Mosen, does that answer your question?
Oh, definitely. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. There is any other question?
Mauricio, you mentioned that you had to finish this project in a 1-year time frame. Can you speak some of the challenges that you had to finish this in a year?
But I think I mentioned several, but I think what makes it particularly difficult is that was to get the parts, really. Sorry. To get the parts to build this with this equipment, also to gather all the patients, to make the measurements, and I think that those are the more difficult parts.
Thanks.
Okay, so maybe we can just move now to the GUND Lab presentation.
Thank you. So my name is Vincent. I used to be a Catalyst Awardee in 2020 from France through the EITL's European program. And our goal for this project was to make a device that could follow the evolution of wound. So hence we call it Wound Lab. So we would like to make a non-invasive measurement tool continuously to measure the evolution of wound in the case of difficult to heal wound. Next slide. So Wound Lab is a non-invasive measurement tool that can measure the evolution of the wound by sampling the exudate coming from the wound or the volatile compound in a way that is measured in a non-invasive, non-toxicity, not interfering with wound healing, and that the nurse can measure without opening the bandage. using a simple smartphone. So that's really the idea, is that we make one sample, one device per bandage. Of course, we don't recycle the device, and so the device needs to be minimalistic in terms of electronics. Next slide. As you know, the chronic wounds is a very severe problem all around the world. It affects two populations, the elderly with the vascular disease, vascular leg ulcers. It's up to 3% of the elderly. It's very painful in many cases. And it's also affecting more and more diabetic people. 25% of diabetic during a disease will have an ulcer on the foot. And there is a risk of amputation, and it's affecting more and more people due to the pandemic of diabetes. So it's more than 500,000 amputations per year just for the diabetic foot ulcers. So the cost and the burden for healthcare is very big. Only in US, it's estimated to be above $28 billion every year, and with an increased growth rate of about 6% every year. So there is a need to a better follow-up of that. Next slide. So during the wound healing, there is not too much objective data, because what is more and more used today is a smartphone photograph taken after removing the bandage. But something during the evolution of the bandage that can monitor without opening the bandage, there is no such thing on the market yet. And there is a need for that, which is asked for all the ecosystem from the nurse to the medical doctors. And so we believe that this kind of product has a really possibility to enter the market if it's not too expensive. Next slide. So what we have designed is a tool which is both hardware and software, so it's a full ecosystem. The most innovative part is actually the hardware part, which is placed inside the bandage. So it's a small patch that you can insert on the side of the wound that will be in contact with some of the exudate, and that will measure that continuously in a way which is either interrogated by an apparatus placed in the room or just collected by approaching a smartphone. So we use for that commonly used RFID systems, which are now equipping any smartphone on the planet. There is a software, an app, which is inside the smartphone of the nurse. It could be also inside the patient's smartphone, in case with the smaller version, which does not have the same features. But the role of the smartphone is not only to collect this data, but also to transmit it to a cloud system that will aggregate all the data, bandage after bandage. And this will create a history of the wound, a full diary, if you know. So that we know on the course of several months and sometimes even several years, in the case of very long to heal ulcers, the full history of the wound. And this data collected will be a very useful tool for knowing better the evolution of wound, which is sometimes going to chronicity and sometimes having some infection. So this awareness is, I think, a key factor to reduce the occurrence of bad infection. Next slide. So we believe that Wound Lab, which is now starting in clinical phase, is going to bring many advantages on the full ecosystem. For patients, it's a better outcome. Obviously, we would like to reduce the occurrence of amputation drastically by this kind of tool. It's also awareness of the evolution of the wound and improvement of the quality of life by the reduction of the wound healing. For nurses, it's also a tool for better workflow and some advice and decision-making tool. It's also a tool for the doctor to get more information about their patient coming back to at home. So it's a tool for hospitalization at home, where the doctor can know remotely how the wound evolves. And for hospital and for healthcare corporation and insurance, it's a tool to have a better resource management and to know better about the data And it's also a tool, we believe, for the new clinical trial of new way of taking care of this wound, because now we have access to the data that can be more accurately follow the evolution in spatial and innovative care. So that's it. And so we are ready to answer your questions. Thanks a lot.
Thanks and for the presentation, Vincent. There is any question for the audience from the audience?
Yes, no,
if not, I have several questions. Vincent, how this patch assess the health of the wound actually?
Yes. So for that, the real innovation is using a sensor, a biosensor, which is biocompatible and flexible. This is based on a new material, which is a very thin layer of carbon, which is fixed on a biocompatible plastic. And we follow the evolution of the electrical resistance of the sensor versus time. So we sample this sensor every 5 minutes, and this can get information depending on the surface chemistry of the sample. So some of them measure just the pH, and evolution of pH is already a very good information about the evolution of the wound. But we have sensors to follow the temperatures and more accurate, more specific biomarkers due to the wound exudate composition.
Oh, great.
Sorry, can I ask my question?
Sure, Mohsen.
Thanks, Vincent. That's very interesting. So I have two questions. One is, your system or your solution is about the quantity or is about the quality measure, or both?
So this is a quantitative device which measures actually the relative variation. So for example, if you have a rapid relative variation of pH or temperature, then it is obviously the indication of the onset of an infection, for example. It's capable of measuring tiny variation versus time. So you have a curve of evolution. Of course, it's something we have to, it's at the beginning, we've done the preclinical studies. We have to validate on site in the field the device, and the case of diabetic foot ulcers.
Yeah, it's also is about the outcome measure. It could be about the underlying reason for example, for diabetes, like based on the timing or temporal pattern. Can you say about the circulation or something you can find underlying condition or problem?
So I don't know exactly what you're referring to about in the case of diabetes, there is something which is not well understood, is that the wound healing is sometimes stuck in between. Wound healing is several phases. There is this phase of inflammatory phase, of the phase of proliferation of new tissues, and some in between inflammatory phase and this proliferative phase, there is sometimes a bifurcation towards chronicity, and this bifurcation is not very well understood. It's associated to some inflammatory response due to some presence of metalloprotease, for example. And this tool we would like to promote is really targeting of better understanding this evolution versus time.
Yeah, so I guess you need to kind of record different profiles of patients to understand.
Absolutely. That's the point. We are at the moment we are inventing the equivalent of the thermometer before creating the notion of fever and before understanding how fever evolves in time to pattern a disease. So really, we are just at the stage of inserting, bringing a new instrument to the community, which is reliable enough so they can build on that some scientific studies.
Right. I have another question, but maybe I should ask first if there is any other question from the audience. No? Vincent, you mentioned the idea, I guess you are planning to interconnect with the health system, so hospitals and general practitioners and so on. So and one of the things when you build equipment for remote health is that the variety of systems is very broad. So have you think on how you should able to do that?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. Interoperability is key, of course, because we don't want to have our own proprietary system for the communication. So for that, we use the most spread and ubiquitous system you can find, which is actually the one used for the banking industry and the one used for logistic industries, which is based on the very widespread system. Nevertheless, even though they are widespread, you can build on it something secure because it's coming from the banking industry. So this is something which is compatible with data collection, security, and protection of individual data.
Right. Thanks. So if there are no other questions, we will move forward to the next speaker with Anand Mhatre. Just before that, just remind you that after all these three presentations, we'll continue discussion, so you can pose your own questions later on. Please, Anand.
Thank you, Mauricio. Next slide, please. Oh, the previous slide. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Anand Mhatre. I am from the Ohio State University. So I'll be talking today about improving elderly wheelchair user safety. And I want to note that majority of this work was carried out at the University of Pittsburgh, where I had my previous faculty appointment. And right now I'm at the Ohio State University. Next slide, please. So I'm an assistant professor here. I'm a 2020 Catalyst Awardee funded by the NIA. I have a unique affiliation. So I am between the Health Sciences School and the College of Engineering, which really helps me do my interdisciplinary research, which is design, maintenance, testing standards, transfer of assistive technologies, all aimed towards improving the safety of wheelchair users. Next slide, please. So what is today's talk about? It's about wheelchairs. And so if you've seen the news recently, you may have seen the Pope use a wheelchair. Next slide. So the Pope was in Canada recently to meet the indigenous people. He held prayers, he delivered sermons, he held public meetings. And so he's been experiencing mobility limitations for a while now. And his wheelchair has been helping him commute, perform daily activities, and engage with the community. Next slide, please. Like the Pope, the United Nations says there are about 250 million elderly with moderate to severe disabilities in this world. And at some point, to have mobility and to perform daily activities, they would require a wheelchair. As far as full-time users go, there are about 100 million across the world and 5 million in the United States. Next slide. So what's the big problem with wheelchairs? And that's this. Wheelchair users are facing wheelchair failures very frequently. Every 3 to 6 months, some part on the wheelchair breaks. Now imagine that happening to your car when you're driving to your workplace, right? Next slide, please. If you look at the failure incidents over the last 15 years, it's steadily increasing. In fact, looking at that picture, it's almost tripled, right? And when you look at some of my research, you find that older adults, especially in less resource settings, those folks with severe disabilities, and then if you look at some other work, you see that veterans are at higher risk for failures and consequences. Next slide, please. There are a lot of different consequences. When we talk to wheelchair users about consequences, we found that people are bruised or injured when the wheelchair is rolling and some part breaks. People get stranded on the bus, in the malls, on the roadside. They are missing medical appointments, repair bills from the providers. They can be as high as $4,000 if the wheelchair provider is not fully reimbursed. Repair times can be as high as 4 to 6 months. Since the user is without a functional wheelchair, they have to stay in the bed, and that opens up the risk for pressure injuries and rehospitalization. Older adults told us that they are getting loaner wheelchairs, hospital-style wheelchairs, when their wheelchair is in a state of repair. And those wheelchairs are not helping with their daily needs. These wheelchairs, these hospital-style wheelchairs, the loaner wheelchairs, are inadequate for them. Next slide, please. It's just not a wheelchair is a problem. When we surveyed about 100 wheelchair providers who are in charge of upkeep of wheelchairs, they are having a lot of issues with repairs. So their wheelchair technicians are constantly firefighting repairs because repairs are happening, the failures are happening at a very high rate. Also, the repair business unit is operating at a loss mostly. Next slide, please. So we want to reduce wheelchair failures and consequences. My research shows that preventative wheelchair maintenance can prevent wheelchair failures and consequences. However, we do not have tools and technology or the means to inform a user or a provider when you need to do maintenance or do part replacement. Next slide, please. That is where I'm developing WheelTrack. WheelTrack is a wheelchair condition monitoring tool built for maintenance. As you can see on the left-hand side, there's the blue sensor that goes on the wheelchair, monitors how and where a wheelchair is used. It transmits that data to the cloud, where there is an algorithm that computes a wheelchair wear index. When the index reaches a particular threshold based on use, the user, and the wheelchair, the app can send a notification to the elderly user that it's time for maintenance. It can send a notification to the provider that it's time for part replacement. The app also shows usage statistics so that we can know the older adult is active or not. It also collects some standard outcome mobility measures from the users. Next slide. So as far as our research and development progress goes on this project, we are finding that with the index, that with a particular index value and a certain weight configuration across the wheels, we are seeing that the users are specifically at a higher risk. They are experiencing critical parts within a year time frame. For this cohort, we want to have specific recommendations, and that could be bi-weekly maintenance, as well as for providers, they need to do wheelchair checkups every quarter. If you heard one of the speakers say today, Anne from Novartis, she said that there is inequity as far as older adults' health is concerned is in low and middle income settings. And that is where we are also working. There's an ongoing study that's happening with the National Institute of Geriatrics in Mexico, where we are studying the use patterns and maintenance recommendations for older adults using wheelchairs there. In the Catalyst Award, we also looked at the development of the app. This is where we casted a wider net and we got feedback from different users and stakeholders in the wheelchair industry about what should we include in the app. We did some usability testing with older adults. Let's see what we found. Next slide. So a majority of the older adults welcomed doing maintenance using the WheelTrack app. What they liked are maintenance reminders, the ability to report failures, the connection with the providers. Some of the facilitators for using this technology are smart technology used by adults, older adults, the willingness to subscribe to WheelTrack, and also the maintenance support that is provided by family and caregivers. Next slide, please. We discovered some barriers for maintenance as well. So more than 90% of the folks who we interviewed, they did not know about maintenance, they lacked the knowledge, they lacked the training. That is where older adults recommended that we need to include video tutorials, guidelines, checklists, manuals. So whenever they see a reminder, they can follow those guidelines and conduct wheelchair maintenance. We found some health issues, reduced vision, the ability to navigate different app features. That's where older adults recommended that we need to do some age-friendly modifications. We need to have improved text, colors, personalized information so that the app is usable. Next slide. So this work is not possible without having a multidisciplinary team. We are a team of designers, engineers, clinicians, therapists. We also collaborate across the sector broadly with providers and manufacturers. Next slide. So we are building WheelTrack. That's our novel mHealth technology for preventing wheelchair failures. We want older adults to least worry about wheelchair failures and the disruption they cause. We want them to continue with their lifestyle and pursue healthy longevity. Next slide. Thank you for listening to me patiently, and I open the floor for some interesting Q&A.
Thanks, Anand. Thanks for the presentation. It was very interesting.
Thanks.
I will start with one question. So first, I think it's a great idea. I mean, I used to live with my grandmother. It was a real problem. So, if I understand correctly, it's a device that is independent of the wheelchair. So, for any wheelchair, but wheelchairs comes in many flavors. So, how are you planning to handle that?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. In fact, let me even take that a little bit further. Different people have different use patterns, right? So older adults patterns may different from somebody who is quite active. So we want to develop these personas. The algorithm will be tweaked for different use patterns and different wheelchairs. So power wheelchairs, manual wheelchairs, tilt in space, they would be having different use patterns. So we are developing the index for these different use cases.
Okay, so you are planning to capture and get these patterns for every kind of user. I mean,
right, and we will compare that with the failure frequency that we are seeing in the field, and that's what we just shared with when I showed the index study. That's what we did, and so we'll have tailored recommendations for each use case. We think that for active ultra lightweight wheelchair users, there could be a bi-weekly maintenance reminder, and that can be paired with wheelchair checkups by providers every quarter. So that's for the active cohort, and as we do it more for older adults, we'll find a different frequency.
Right. There is any comment from the audience?
Yeah, Anand, thanks. How much is it to use it for the end user? How much they have to pay for your application?
That's a great question. Currently, we are looking at getting the sensor on a single board, so that will change the pricing. As far as the app is concerned, we asked users rather than us determining the price. We asked users how much are they willing to pay, and so we got different responses. Some were dependent on insurance. Some of them said that we are tired of the repair bills, and so we are happy to pay somewhere on an average of $30 to $35 for this for subscribing to WheelTrack. So different responses. We are still to understand what the price is, but pretty soon as we develop this technology.
Yeah, and my next question, I think that Marcio asked about the different end users. So, for example, if you have sport performers, wheelchair sports, there are many contact situations in their sports that can significantly affect the quality of this wheelchair over time. When you have a stroke patient, so it's not too much, So I think you have a good idea about how to classify your end users based on the monthly, for example, subscription or annual subscription, because of the number of time they have to use this wheelchair in the daily life.
Right. And at the same time, we also want to look at, because a wheelchair is provided in many different ways across the entire world, right? So we also want to look at how the wheelchair is provided and how we can fit this innovation in the ecosystem. So we are also working on that piece.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Other questions?
Yeah, I have another question. But you mentioned that you did an usability test in the final user, so with elders, right? So, and how was the reception of the technology? Because sometimes it's not so easy to for older people to receive new technology. I mean, how was your experience with that?
It was quite interesting. Our hypothesis was that we'll have a higher usability for older adults, and given that we know about the digital divide with the population, we want to make something that is more usable, that is age friendly. So when we took this app to the older adults, some of the features were great. For example, as I said, failure reporting, connection with the provider. Just that you have a maintenance reminder, right? So some features were appreciated. However, the navigation of the app, the text, the colors some of them, they want to see some improvements so that they can be usable. They can go to this app and it's easily navigate. You can navigate it very easily. So we discovered some things that work and some things that don't work. The next step for us, the future work, is to work on things that users have recommended, so that they can again integrate this in their own lifestyle and use the technology.
Right. So I think now we have all the three presentations. We all know a little bit of the projects. So we'll move to the general discussion with some questions. I have some questions, some idea from the organization, but please feel free to pose questions either to one specific speaker or to all speakers. And I just want to start with one question, maybe related to what Anand was mentioning. If to all the speakers, if they found any surprising findings during their research. Let's start with you, Anand. What surprised you during your project?
Yeah, I think one of the surprising things for us was, like, while I say the digital divide, right? It was surprising to find the smart technology use from majority of the older adult participants that we interviewed. So about 75% of them, not the same that agreed to using wheel track, but others. So about 9 out of 12 individuals, they were using smartphones and tablets, and that's great, right? You want to leverage that. I think as this technology becomes more widely available, as it becomes more affordable, it would be nice for wheel track to be adoptable by this population. So that was a surprising thing for me.
Great, surprised me too. Vincent, what about your project?
Yes, what was a big surprise for us is that the response for the patients about our new tools. You see, we are proposing an approach which is very geeky, very something that we were afraid that people look at this like an unnecessary tool or very a gadget. And actually, it was all the contrary. We got a tremendous feedback from the patient, from also the nurse. We were very happy to test our device and they were eager to wait for its introduction. So this was a very nice surprise and a very good encouragement for us.
Yeah, I think it's an important issue. I mean, wounds stay open and they open the door for infections and so on. In our case, for the surprise findings, I mean, one of the things is autoacoustic emissions that you may think are super well established how to measure. Actually, when you go to the real deal how to do it, it's not super clear, the details. I mean, how many repetitions, the amplitude as a function of the frequency and so on. So sometimes some of them the details were not in papers, were not in books, and we had to test a lot. That was one of the things that you may think, super established because it's standard in babies, but it is not. It requires a lot of testing, and so that was very time consuming, and of course was a lot of fun to define that. Great. Any other questions or comments from the audience?
Yeah, I want to ask because I think you three gentlemen, you had very similarity in terms of the stage of research. So you had your prototype and you wanted to test it in the end user. And my question is, what was disappointing in your communication with your end user? And did you find something challenging? You had to came back to your previous stage in terms of the technology design or other things because your end user gave you negative feedback or not very something you like it, and you had to change your model or change your plan?
I don't know. Is Anand or Vincent want to go with that question? From my side, so the main difference between in the hearing assessment, the main difference between the expensive clinical standard equipment is that this kind of equipment provides to the technician a lot of feedback. Is the headphone well positioned? Is the health? I mean, your ears can be jammed. You can have a cold, and there is no way you can measure sounds. So there is a lot of small checks you need to do before actually measuring. That's probably something that happens also to Vincent or Anand. And of course, the first version has zero feedback. So the patient had a cold, and it will tell you there is no sound, but it's not there is no measurement. It's just the patient is sick. You cannot measure. So it was something that at least we learned that if you really want to deploy this without an engineer just beside the equipment, you need to a lot of thinking about what are the possible ways it can fail and give feedback so the user can really take control and adopt the technology and really use it. I don't know what's your experience, Vincent or Anand?
Yeah, absolutely true. You see, that's something when you introduce a new disrupting technology for medical science, it's always very challenging because at the beginning, you see, we introduce new materials, so you have no right to use it directly on the patient. We have to do all the preclinical studies. But at the same time, we need to already know from the beginning how the patient will react and how the system will be introduced in a way so that we don't do for nothing the preclinical studies. So it's very challenging to, and we have to project ourselves or to make some mock-up experiment to be sure that what we introduce makes sense. And so that's a very challenging part as well.
Anand, in your side?
Yeah, I think whenever we test technology, we do find a few odd responses. One of I can share one of them is we had a couple of participants who did encounter failures and consequences. However, their feedback was they know their wheelchair better. And one participant can leverage the support for maintenance from their caregiver. And so that is where they felt that WheelTrack could be, it does meet the need, however, they would not like to use it. And that is okay. It is how they see it. And so we still, while they encounter failure and consequences, perhaps WheelTrack can inform their provider that the wheelchair is in a state where you'll have an upcoming failure and you need to have an intervention. So maybe the user does not use it right away. However, the provider gives that additional coverage for the wheelchair. Again, it depends on reimbursement and other policies and whatnot. But I think that's the change we may want to make to the technology. We also discovered some other changes to the technology. Maybe instead of, so right now we have an SD card that stores the data based on how somebody is living in a remote location. Somebody may not have a Wi-Fi coverage. So we want to understand what are those communication technology, right? Is it Wi-Fi? Is it LTE enabled? Or is it remote data collection, which is manual data collection by the provider every 3 months or so? So those are some of the other things which we may want to incorporate in the technology.
Great. And maybe now I want to just move the discussion a little bit to what will be our next steps, and combine it with that. What kind of partnership are we looking for, or we maybe some of you already find some partnership, industrial partnership or university partnership? I don't know if Vincent or Anand have a comment on that.
Happy to go first. So I think as we advance the WheelTrack technology, it is key for us to partner with some of the wheelchair providers who are in. So again, I talked about the user aspect, right? The Catalyst Awardee was about user-led maintenance. I think along with the user maintenance, it is important that providers also have the share of maintenance. And so we are investigating that. We also talking to wheelchair providers. As I said, we surveyed about 100 of them. We try to understand what their pain points are and how Wheeltrack can provide some gain points, right? So we want to interface with them. At the same time, we also want to look forward to interacting with insurance folks as to what is reimbursable, right? So those investigations will follow as far as Wheeltrack technology goes. The future work also from the user side is we do want to make the technology more usable and see how we can have this more how we can make it adaptable, and can we establish the efficacy of failure prevention with our technology with users. So those are the future steps and the partnerships we want to make.
Just curious, Anand, how you approach to because you mentioned wheelchair providers, for instance, and sure, I guess there is a ton. So you openly actively write them 100 of the providers looking for information. I mean, that's something we have been discussing in our group.
Sure. No, I think I want to say that I have been fortunate in a way with that, because the way as I said, my affiliation is at the Ohio State, as well as my previous appointment at the University of Pittsburgh. We constantly are in collaborations with the network of wheelchair providers that happens through the wheelchair clinics that we have at Ohio State and the University of Pittsburgh. The University of Pittsburgh also runs a continuing education program, which is for clinicians and therapists. So this is a broader network that we can tap into. And so again, I have been fortunate that I can leverage these networks.
And from your side, Vincent? We cannot hear you.
Yeah, in this one-care device, so we need to partner both at the beginning with the key opinion leaders, so they can test and they can really assess for the efficiency of the product. So typically the leaders in our field are the diabetologists or the wound care specialists. And we need also to partner with the nurse association, so they can use in the field the device. They can send feedback about the ergonomics of it. And finally, we need to partner with the wound care companies so that the device can be inserted in their line of products. So it's really a partnership all along the way.
But it's something. I mean, with this partnership with companies, for instance, is something you already did or something you are looking for, Vincent?
Yeah, so we already working with a couple of companies to look for feasibility study. So there are different ways to do that. Either we sell our product as a white label, so they're inserting them in their own line of products, or we could sell it as a patch, which is standalone, so that the nurse is keeping the same type of bandage she's using usually for the given use case, and then she can insert, or you can insert the device on the side and make some kind of composite system. So we are working on those possibilities.
Yeah. Well, from our side, it's kind of similar. I mean, we contact a company that develops another kind of measure in the ears. So we are trying to integrate this new measure in their own equipment. That's our plan A, let's say. I think we have 1 minute left. I don't know if anyone in the audience or maybe in the panel has some question or comment they would like to share with us. Seems not.
Just thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
You're welcome, Mason. I think it was a very interesting discussion. I'm really happy to see other researchers that are in similar stages of development, and they really care for this problem. I mean, all problems seems very important for me, so I'm very happy to see all this research going on.